The roar of a motorcycle echoed down a quiet suburban street, cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a sharp blade. Kids playing nearby froze mid-laugh, their eyes wide as the biker thundered past, leaving a trail of dust and unease in his wake. This wasn't just any biker. He was known around town for his mean streak. But today, he was about to make a mistake that would change everything. At a small park on the corner, a group of people sat scattered under the shade of trees. Among them, a man was relaxing on a bench, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses that hid his face. By his side, two loyal dogs played happily, their tails wagging in the sunlight. What no one realized was that this quiet man was none other than Jason Statham. Yes, the Jason Statham, taking a rare moment of peace away from the spotlight. The biker, oblivious to who he was about to cross, had his own agenda. His twisted idea of fun included chasing dogs off the sidewalk and laughing at their frightened reactions. As he sped past the park, he spotted the dogs playing near the bench. With a smirk, he revved his engine and veered closer, sending a spray of gravel toward the unsuspecting animals. One of the dogs yelped, startled, and darted behind Statham. The actor's calm demeanor shifted ever so slightly, his jaw tightened, and he slowly lowered his sunglasses. His sharp gaze locked onto the biker, who had now stopped a few feet away, clearly enjoying the chaos he caused. "Hey, what's your problem?" a woman shouted from a nearby bench, but the biker just laughed and revved his engine again. The park grew tense, the cheerful atmosphere replaced with unease as people exchanged worried glances. Jason stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, as if weighing every step. He wasn't the type to rush into a scene, but there was something unmistakably dangerous about the way he carried himself. His dogs stayed close, sensing the shift in their owner's mood. The biker, now more amused than ever, taunted the crowd. "Relax, they're just dogs," he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. But what he didn't realize was that he wasn't dealing with just any dog owner. Jason took a step forward, his calm yet commanding presence making the biker falter for a brief second. "You've got a lot of nerve," Jason said quietly, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that sent shivers down your spine without raising an octave. The biker, trying to save face, chuckled nervously and revved his engine again. "What are you gonna do about it?" he challenged. The slight crack in his voice betrayed his growing doubt. And that's when it happened. Jason leaned in just enough for his next words to be heard by everyone around. "You're about to find out." The crowd held their breath, tension thick in the air as the biker's cocky grin faltered. And with that, the stage was set for a confrontation no one would forget. The air grew heavy as Jason Statham locked eyes with the biker, his sharp gaze unflinching. The park, once filled with laughter and chatter, had fallen silent. Even the birds seemed to have paused their songs, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The biker, still trying to maintain his tough act, shifted in his seat, his fingers nervously tapping the handlebars of his motorcycle. Jason's dogs, usually playful and carefree, stayed by his side, their ears perked and eyes fixed on the man who had just tried to hurt them. One of the dogs, a sturdy German shepherd named Max, let out a low growl that only added to the tension. The biker glanced at Max, his bravado wavering for just a moment, but quickly covered it up with a smirk. "You think you're scary or something?" The biker sneered, his voice louder than before, as if he were trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "This ain't Hollywood, buddy. Stay out of my way." Jason didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer, his calm yet commanding presence filling the space between them. The crowd that had gathered watched with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. Some had already pulled out their phones, ready to record what they thought might become a viral moment. But this wasn't just about the dogs. This wasn't about a petty act of cruelty from a man who thought the world owed him something. Jason could see it in the biker's posture, in the way he carried himself. This was a man who had likely caused trouble wherever he went, someone who thrived on intimidating others to feel powerful. Jason had dealt with men like him before, on and off the screen. As Jason stood there, a memory flashed in his mind. He thought of his own childhood, growing up in a rough neighborhood where bullies often picked on those who couldn't fight back. He remembered the times he'd stepped in to protect someone smaller, someone who didn't have the strength to stand up for themselves. It was a part of who he was, a part that had shaped the man he'd become. The biker, still seated on his motorcycle, laughed again, though this time it sounded forced. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, but his eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd. He didn't expect anyone to step up to him, especially not someone who looked as calm and collected as Jason did. From the corner of the park, an older man spoke up, his voice trembling but resolute. "You can't go around scaring people like that, especially not innocent animals." His words, though quiet, struck a chord with the onlookers, who murmured their agreement. Jason turned slightly, acknowledging the man with a small nod. Then, without breaking his stride, he looked back at the biker. "You've made your point," Jason said, his tone even, almost conversational. "Now it's time you learned something." The biker's smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped, trying to sound tough, but failing to hide the edge of unease in his voice. Jason took one more step forward, his shadow looming over the biker like a storm cloud. "Respect," he said simply, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. The biker's grip tightened on the handlebars. The engine revved again, louder this time, as if he were preparing to make his escape. But something about Jason's presence made him hesitate. The crowd watched in suspense, waiting to see what would happen next. And just like that, the scene teetered on the edge, the tension so thick it was almost unbearable. The biker had a choice to make, but no one, not even he, knew what it would be. The biker sat frozen for a moment, his fingers hovering over the throttle. The air around him seemed to crackle with unspoken tension, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the crowd's eyes pressing down on him. His usual tricks, intimidation, mocking laughs, and careless cruelty, weren't working here. Jason's steady gaze didn't flinch, didn't waver. "What's your problem, man?" The biker finally blurted out, his voice sharper now, as if trying to deflect the attention. He gestured broadly toward the dogs. "They're just mutts. Why does it even matter?" Jason tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been a hint of a smile, or perhaps a warning. "It matters," he said evenly, "because they trust us to take care of them. They're not just dogs, they're family." The crowd murmured in agreement, a ripple of quiet solidarity spreading among them. A young woman holding a small terrier stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "People like you always think you can get away with this kind of stuff, but not today." The biker sneered, clearly feeling the walls closing in. "Oh, so now it's a whole park full of heroes, huh? Gimme a break." But his voice lacked the confidence it carried earlier, and his eyes flickered nervously to the growing crowd. Meanwhile, Jason's dogs stayed rooted beside him, their tails still, their eyes sharp and focused on the man who had tried to harm them. Max let out another low growl, and the biker flinched slightly before trying to cover it with a scoff. Jason finally moved, taking one deliberate step closer. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it cut through the air like a knife. "Here's the thing. You think scaring people, hurting animals, makes you look strong, but all it really shows is how weak you are." The biker opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't used to being called out like this, especially not in front of an audience. He glanced around, looking for an exit, but the crowd had subtly closed in, creating an invisible barrier around him. "Why don't you just leave?" someone shouted from the back, their voice carrying the frustration everyone else was feeling. The biker's jaw tightened. "I don't take orders from a bunch of nobodies," he snapped, revving the engine again. But as the noise from the bike roared, Jason stepped even closer, his voice cutting through the sound. "You've already lost," he said simply. "The only question is, how much worse do you want to make it for yourself?" The biker's eyes darted back to Jason, then to the crowd. His bravado was cracking, piece by piece, but he wasn't ready to back down, not yet. His ego wouldn't let him. "What are you gonna do about it, huh? Hit me." "Go ahead," he spat, trying to regain control of the situation. Jason didn't move. He didn't need to. His silence, his stillness, was more intimidating than any raised fist could ever be. The biker shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that he'd underestimated the man standing in front of him. But before he could say anything else, a voice from the edge of the crowd called out, stopping him cold. "Hey, isn't that Jason Statham?" The biker froze, his eyes widening slightly as the name registered. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd, and suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers turned into murmurs, and people began pulling out their phones, filming the scene with renewed interest. The biker looked back at Jason, panic flickering in his eyes. He wasn't just facing an angry dog owner. He was facing someone who could take him apart in seconds if he wanted to. And now, everyone watching knew it too. Jason finally spoke again, his voice steady and controlled. "You've got one chance to do the right thing," he said. "Walk away, before this gets worse for you." The biker hesitated, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The crowd watched, waiting to see what he would do. But the tension in the air hadn't lifted. It had only grown heavier, leaving everyone on edge, wondering what would happen next. The biker's fingers twitched on the throttle, the engine growling beneath him like a restless animal. His eyes darted between Jason, the crowd, and the growing number of phones pointed in his direction. The weight of the situation was finally sinking in, but his pride kept him glued to the spot. His jaw tightened as he forced a laugh, trying to mask his growing fear. "What are you all staring at?" he barked, his voice sharp but hollow. "Nothing's gonna happen, just a guy with his dogs acting tough." But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. The murmurs grew louder, people whispering about the biker's cruelty and Jason's calm but commanding presence. Jason didn't flinch. He stood firm, the same steady energy radiating off him like a storm waiting to break. His dogs remained at his side, their unwavering loyalty a quiet reminder of what the biker had tried to disrupt. Max let out another low growl, the sound cutting through the tense air like a warning. The biker turned his attention back to Jason, leaning forward slightly as if to reassert control. "You think you've got everyone on your side? Fine, but I don't owe you, or anyone else here, anything." His voice wavered, just enough for Jason to notice. Jason took a slow step closer, the movement so deliberate it was almost unnerving. "You're right," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything, but you do owe them." He gestured toward his dogs, their wide, trusting eyes fixed on the man who had hurt them. The biker faltered, his bravado slipping as he glanced at the animals. For a brief second, something like regret flickered in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "They're just dogs," he muttered, almost to himself, as if trying to convince himself it was true. Jason's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "No," he said firmly. "They're more than that. They're loyal, they're kind, and they didn't deserve what you did to them." The crowd murmured in agreement, their support emboldening Jason's words. The biker's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment, but he still refused to back down. He revved the engine again, the loud roar echoing through the park as if to drown out the voices around him. But the noise couldn't mask the unease in his expression. He knew he was outnumbered, outmatched, and now out of options. Jason took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The biker stiffened, his hands gripping the handlebars so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Here's the thing," Jason said, his voice low, but filled with unmistakable authority. "You can ride off right now, pretend none of this ever happened. Or you can stay and find out exactly what happens when you cross the wrong people." The biker's eyes flickered with indecision. The tension in the park was at its breaking point, the crowd holding their breath as they waited to see what would happen next. Jason's calm demeanor only heightened the suspense, making it impossible to predict his next move. The biker shifted, glancing at the crowd once more. The weight of their judgment, the silent condemnation in their eyes, bore down on him like a heavy storm. His ego told him to stay, to fight back, to prove he wasn't afraid. But the part of him that valued self-preservation was screaming at him to leave. And still Jason stood there, unwavering. The dogs, the crowd, the entire park seemed to revolve around him as he waited for the biker's decision. The air was thick with suspense, every second dragging on as if time itself had slowed. Finally, the biker's hand moved, his fingers gripping the throttle with renewed determination. The engine rolled louder, filling the park with its deafening sound. Jason didn't move, didn't flinch, his gaze locked onto the man in front of him.